So welcome everybody. We're so happy to have our friend David Loy with us this evening to have a conversation. He has always been very, very generous with us. I think that he likes us, and we're going to have a relaxed conversation with him. So we met David last year at the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies, and then the group that was there continued to meet online monthly. And so we created a name for the group. I think Dan suggested the name of the group, and we call ourselves the Dangerous Times Ecosattvas. And this was piggybacking on the title of that workshop retreat at the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies that David facilitated then. Then some of us had the opportunity to be together at the Rocky Mountain Ecodharma Retreat Center in July, August 2022. And we also kept together, meeting online every now and then. Great friendships were created. And that was an awesome experience for all of us, to be nature, really. Not to be in nature or to be with nature, but to feel that we are nature and nature is us, and there's no distinction there. A great, great encouragement for the work that we do, the work of trying to save life on this planet. Book clubs were created. We have Ecodharma book club where we read David's book, Ecodharma, Buddhist Teachings for the Ecological Crisis. Other book clubs were created. We read Paul Hawkins' Blessed Unrest, Joanna Macy's Active Hope, and we keep meeting and doing things. All of us, in a way, I think that inspired by what happened in 2022, became more active in 2023. In my Sangha, for instance, I showed Planetary and Love Thy Nature. That Sylvie, the filmmaker, is here with us today, and so trying to bring it all together and see what we're going to do. So today specifically, we're going to be talking about the chapter 6 of the Ecodharma book, and don't know if David is going to do a summary, but if not, we can just jump into question and answers and have a conversation. Okay, so David, I am passing the baton on to you, and I cannot tell you how happy I am to be with you. Good friend.
And I cannot tell you how happy I am that you've organized this, Piero, and that all of us are coming together, because this is a special time with a special group, and I really am grateful for the opportunity. I haven't thought about summarizing chapter 6, and to be frank, I think maybe that's not the best use of our time. People can refer to it for themselves. So my idea was just to have an open conversation about, the issues raised in that chapter and also related. And I suppose we could start out with the two questions that Juliet and Walt Kosmowski has raised. What do you think? I mean, one idea is Juliet, and is Walt here? I don't see him.
I don't see Walt, but Juliet is here.
So maybe Juliet could present your question, and actually there's a lot of overlap with Walt's, and then there are a couple sort of aspects or dimensions to the answer that I have in mind, so I could say that, and my guess is that's going to spur a lot more conversation. But I really don't want it to be all me. I mean, let's make this a real, let's make sure we open this up. I have some things to say, but, so does everyone else. And somehow the idea that any of us has all the answers seems more and more ridiculous to me. We all do what we can. So I'm wondering, Juliet, would you like to start by reading or summarizing or expressing again in your own words what you were asking, reflecting?
Sure, thank you. And to Piero's wonderful list of all the things we've all been doing, some of us were just completed the 8-week, 8-session Ecosattva training together. with Piero and Dan and Bethany and Nancy and Regan. We're all part of that. There were 8 of us that did it. So most of us are here and hoping to now fold into this Sangha to keep going. Bethany and Dan and Piero and Nancy, I think we're connected in other ways also. So, and it also helped to inspire Regan and I to partner. We're going to co-lead a retreat in Connecticut at Mercy by the Sea, April 30th to May 2nd, on mindfulness and nature, the path of the heart. And so the inner nature of our own hearts and merging with the heart of the world will be kind of our purpose. It's going to be a 2.5-day retreat. So we'll maybe drop the link in the chat at some point, just in case any of you are near Connecticut and would have any interest or would want to pass it on to any folks that you know in New England that might have interest in that. And I'm just so grateful to the Ecodharma retreat and to David and then Piero for keeping us all going and organized. It's been really a wonderful journey and it continues. So Piero reached out to ask me if I would generate, a question to help frame tonight. So I went back and reviewed chapter 6 again, as we all read it together in the fall. And I really was struck again in how David was recommending that perhaps we add gratitude to the divine abodes and seeing gratitude itself as foundational. And from that, he shifted to a really, really beautiful quote from Joanna Macy that's very inspirational, that we build upon that gratitude to go, and then the quote begins, right into the heart of the world, into this world of suffering and brokenness and imperfection, to discover the sacred. This kind of liberation takes one not out of the world, but right into it. It is a release into action. And that quote from Joanna Macy's on page 165. So my question is, and I'm really living this question right now, so it's quite salient to me, is, how do we help people wake up through gratitude and love for the world in the most efficient way possible? Things seem pretty urgent, and generally that path over the millennia has been the path of maybe decades of deepening practice. But is there something we can do other than hoping people will give the next few decades to this deepening awareness? Is there something more effective that we might do to bring people together, inspire in a more efficient way? Although efficient is kind of not really a fun word. But how do we get this going, and how do we reach people and take them, right into the heart of the world and release us not into escapism or avoidance, but, into action, to doing something? So that's my question to launch us, David.
And it's a good question. It's a challenging one. And I'm not going to pretend that I have the answer, right? I mean, obviously, there are a couple things I'd like to say about it, but I think that's the question, that's the challenge, that's the urgency for all of us, and each of us in our own way is trying to figure that out. So let me respond in a couple different ways. The first, I want to pick up on what you said, that quotation from Joanna Macy, which actually now seems more and more important. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be giving a talk at the local center, basically sort of inspired or motivated by something Joseph Campbell said. He made the point that so many of the problems in religion occur because people take metaphors literally, that people get confused about the language. And I'm really struck by that and sort of interested in unpacking that. But I think one of the main implications, and extraordinarily important for Buddhism as for other axial age traditions, is, questioning what transcendence means. So often religions have offered us a kind of transcendence that involves escaping this world for a better one. And what's built into that is somehow the presumption that this world is simply a means to a higher end, that if we behave ourselves, we can qualify for heaven or awaken to nirvana, which is understood as somewhere separate from this world. And, more and more, I think the way all of our spiritual traditions have to move, including Buddhism, is understanding transcendence not as a matter of escaping this world, but rather transcending our usual way of experiencing it and our usual way of experiencing ourselves in the world. And I just think it's so important to be explicit about that the spiritual path, just looking at Buddhism itself, before we get into Ecodharma, that our spiritual path is about transforming our experience, not about trying to escape the world, but rather coming to experience it differently. And one way to articulate that is to come to experience it more non-dualistically, that our usual experience is very, very much the sense of a separate self that is fundamentally separate from the rest of the world, and therefore my well-being is fundamentally separate from the rest of the world. And once we can overcome that and realize our interdependence, our non-duality, then bodhisattva activity, including Ecodharma activity, just seems to follow quite naturally. So there's a real danger in Buddhism of still trying to see social and ecological activism as secondary to sort of, or marginal to the fundamental path. And what I think this implies, on the contrary, that actually ecological engagement, however we do it, is essential to our own personal transformation. So that's just something that sorry if I went off in a little bit of a tangent there, but what Joanna Macy said, talking about, our path not escaping, but into the world, just seemed to sort of touch on that and point in that direction. And really, that's a new, it still seems to me that that's a fairly new understanding for most of our religious traditions. Yeah. We still have a way to go before that's accepted and before we really understand what that might mean for the spiritual path. Okay, back to Juliet's question. The whole idea of the Bodhisattva path is a double practice. We continue to work on our own transformation, and yet we continue to be engaged in the world. And the idea is that they're not separate, but rather by that, insofar as we become engaged in the world, that's very important in terms of helping us transcend our ego preoccupations, right? The ego, especially the insecure ego that's always trying to ground itself, make it feel more real, trying to fill up that sort of bottomless pit of lack at our core. So, I think the first answer to Juliet is that, and excuse me, but this is the obvious thing, but I just want to make the point that it's really important that we embody in ourselves, in the way that we live, in the way that we relate to other people, in the way that we relate to the natural world, that we very clearly, deeply embody this gratitude in a way that is explicit or obvious to other people. In other words, let's model the change that we're hoping to happen. Because if we don't do that, it just seems a bit of a hypocrisy, right? If you think about the whole climate change issue, if we don't start with reducing our own carbon footprint to some extent, then I think we're playing kind of a game, that there's not that sort of serious involvement. So I think that's the first element there, that we need to embody ourselves, the gratitude. The other thing that I want to emphasize, and I think it's very easy to overlook. One of the wonderful things about Buddhism, and this is especially clear if you go back and think about the original myth, right? The original story of why it is that the Buddha left home. You remember that? Because well, depending on how you want to take the myth, right? His charioteer took him into town, and for the first time he saw an old man, and then an ill man, and finally a corpse, a dead person, right? And it was that realization of his own mortality that really shook him up and sort of shook him out of his um, sort of self-preoccupation with whatever he was doing as a kind of a prince, and sent him on his quest. But it's not as though, I mean, it's not as though in doing that the Buddha escaped his mortality, right? It wasn't as though, he went out in the world, and even though I think many people would understand it in that way, the tendency is to think that the Buddha or any other spiritual founder has sort of realized some, what do you call it, soul or self or something that's immune to mortality. Um, I think that it's a mistake to think of it that way. I think a very essential part of the Buddhist path is, coming to accept our own mortality. That is what our practice is about. Not denying it, not repressing it in ways that also repress our ability to live fully. Now, why am I going off on that tangent? I think the same is true for us as a civilization and maybe even us as a species. In other words, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Things look bad. One possibility is that civilization as we know it will not survive. Others talk about maybe the possibility of even our species not surviving, right? Just as on the individual level, it's important to accept our mortality. I think it's also important to accept the mortality of the kind of civilization we have. And I kind of hesitate to say that because it sounds kind of giving up, and I don't understand it that way. That's not what I'm encouraging. But I'm saying when we think of the Bodhisattva path, accepting what is and non-attachment to results, there's a kind of grounding in that ability to accept. On the one hand, we do the very best that we can. We don't know what's going to come out of that. Non-attachment to results, I think, requires a certain kind of grounding, a certain acceptance of, at a deep level, even though we do the best we can, an acceptance of what's happening and what may happening. So in a way, that's what chapter 5 is. If you go back to the book, it's trying to make that point that without that acceptance at some level in our own practice, acceptance of our own mortality, acceptance of what may happen to our species, acceptance what may happen to our planet, then if that acceptance isn't there, then there's inevitably going to be a kind of grasping at results and a kind of a panic and an anxiety. So what I'm really trying to say here is we need the equanimity that accepts what's happening at some deep level, that we're going to have to be one with that at the same time as we do the very best we can. Does this make any sense? I mean, and I really don't mean it in a fatalistic way. I mean, think of it this way. We know that in a couple of billion years, the sun is going to expand out, and unless the human species has moved to some other solar system, it's going to be all over, right? What does Buddhism always emphasize? Impermanence, insubstantiality. Well, that doesn't just apply to you and me, that applies at a broader level. Now, we would be all happy if it doesn't happen sooner than necessary, but at some level, there needs to be that kind of equanimity if there's not going to be that kind of grasping at results and that sort of deep anxiety that I think is so often self-defeating. Does that make sense? Just to check, and that's something for people to respond to there. Um, just the one more thing I do want to emphasize, and then I think it's important to sort of throw it open. I'm sure that I mentioned this during both our retreat at Barre and also the Ecodharma Center retreat, but it's not actually in the book, so I just want to reinforce it that our situation today is so unique, right? It's completely different from anything that the Buddha faced some 2,400 years ago in India, Iron Age and all that. And that's why although Buddhism implies a lot about how to do what we do, it doesn't tell us what to do. And I think in order to answer that question, it's really, really essential to reflect deeply on it. And some of you will remember those 3 contemplations that I've mentioned before. And I just want to, reinforce those. Each of us is confronted, given our limited abilities. Each of us is challenged in this way. And I think these contemplations, done both individually but also as a group, can be just so very helpful in helping us decide the way forward. So just to remind you of what they are, number 1, a really deep reflection, contemplation, and taking one's time at this, doing it thoroughly. What do I have to offer, given my age, given my health, given my various abilities, given my background, given my contacts, given my financial situation, right? Do I need to work? Given my responsibilities, are other people, depending on me in what way? How much time do I really have? All of these considerations, I just think that's where each of us needs to start, by evaluating what we're really able and willing to offer. That's the first contemplation. The second contemplation is, and here I'm just trying to remind you, I think most of you are familiar, but the second contemplation is on the basis of the first. What are the good possibilities for me, given the seriousness of the crisis and the fact that there are so many challenges, not only in the ecological world. I mean, we're all very aware of the political, the enormous political and economic challenges at the moment as well. But given all of the crises that we're facing, the interlocking crises, what are the good possibilities for me? And this one might involve, some little bit of research, depending on where one is, and so forth. But in a way, I think the most important of the 3 contemplations, whatever you want to call them, is the third one. But that only works if, once we've really sort of thoroughly reflected on the first 2. Having done that, having really thought, what do I have to offer? And what are the good possibilities? Then I think we need to put them on a shelf. And this is where our meditation practice becomes so important, is just going back and here really going within, trying to get beyond ego, beyond the usual sort of rationality whereby we sort of, try to sort of figure things out. There may be some role for that, but fundamentally it's more getting to some deeper, unconscious or, beyond sense of self level, and just having this great, facing this koan fully. What does my heart, what am I called to do? What calls to me? What speaks to me? And boy, I think that's just so powerful, because if what we do comes out of that, we're going to have so much more energy. It's so much more likely to make a difference. It will seem so whole. It will seem so natural, a part of who we are, sort of flowing naturally out of our essential nature, that can make all the difference in the world. So I just wanted to reinforce that, both on the individual level, but as it's taken me a while to realize, also on the group level. Like if there are groups of people, they can do this together and decide what they as a group, want to do. So anyway, those are just some reflections on what Juliet had to say, but by no means is there anything there that's kind of like the last word. And I think it's great if we can kind of throw this open, and people can respond in whatever way that you'd like.
Thank you. It was excellent. So we have Dan and Bethany with a raised hand. Guys, look at the squares now. And oh, Dan. Bethany is pointing at Dan. This is dangerous. Dan, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I want to say I thought it was great that you highlighted gratitude, And I agree that it should be like one of the Brahma Viharas, that it should be 5 instead of 4, maybe. And Juliet, I'm so glad that you made that, the first question and everything. Because, I mean, all religions talk about gratitude. But, if you're a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew, I mean, gratitude to God, right? Not to the earth. You have to go to indigenous traditions to find people, expressing gratitude to the earth itself. But I think that these days, many people, including people in these theistic traditions, actually are quite open to the idea of feeling gratitude to the earth, for what we have. And people are so much more aware than maybe they used to be about, where all this sort of stuff is coming from. Anyway, just the other thing I want to say is that I feel that the most important thing that Buddhism has to teach the world maybe is about, well, the Sanskrit term is pratichatsamutpada, which gets translated in various ways. Dependent arising is what I'm so used to, but codependent origination, so on and so forth. But anyway, the fact that everything depends upon other things, to be what it is. And, everybody gets a scientific education nowadays. And in biology, geology, and so forth, you learn a lot about, the origins of things. So it's not, it's something that everybody's, familiar with. And I just think that getting people to think about this more is the most important thing, probably, that there is. Feeling gratitude to the earth and understanding the dependent arising or interdependence of everything. And you don't have to mention Buddhism to teach this. You don't even have to mention indigenous religious traditions, although it's kind of cool to do that because a lot of people groove on, the fact that this or that, Native American leader, for instance, said this or that. People have more respect for that these days than they did at one time. So, I mean, there's a million ways that the lesson of dependent arising can be brought out to people. But combining that with the language of gratitude, feeling gratitude for the stuff that you get from the earth. I think that's really what Buddhism has to offer.
You want to comment, David?
I can just mention very briefly, I'm really grateful for the way that Dan, made it more explicit, gratitude to the earth. And, just thinking how often our traditions have seen the earth as the source of suffering, right? Dukkha, this is samsara for Buddhism, and how, yeah, thank you. Thank you for being more explicit about that. I think that's exactly what's needed.
My quick observation is that it's interesting how there is some reaction in some religions. So I was brought up as a Catholic, and when I talk about fellow brought up as Catholics, and love so many aspects, including the aspect of charity, the aspect of kindness, and all the teachings of Jesus, great teacher. But it was interesting when I talk about love of nature, there was a kind of reaction, and I don't know the word in English because you guys remember I was brought up in Brazil, but I think that the word would be, oh, this is not Christian, this is pantheism, something like this. You are worshiping many different gods. You're not worshiping the one true God. So even that, all this mental fog over there has to be cleared out. So thank you, Dan, for love of the earth. We're gonna hear Sylvie and then Doctor's Newtopia. Hi, Sylvie.
Hello, it's really beautiful conversation. And I love that, David, you brought up the point about gratitude, because it feels to me like it brings people the opportunity to contemplate about a sense of awe and wonder as well. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because one of the things that has been very much in my mind about how to have even conversations with people who are like on the other side of the aisle, as we say it, or folks who think very differently from us. One of the things that inspired me just recently, I had the privilege and the honor to go back to Bioneers. The Bioneers conference just happened. 3 days of immersion in environmentalism and indigenous wisdom and social issues. One of the things that one of the speakers said was that even the Republican Party is now starting to shift the conversation, where so many public servants who are Republicans are starting to acknowledge that we really have a problem and that we need to work in the direction of solving the climate crisis. So, that gave me a little bit of hope in that respect. And it also inspired me to think about, how about the people who are really fundamentally, completely denying this problem, how to have a conversation with them. And I do think that the gratitude and sharing the sense of appreciation and wonder and awe for the natural world can be an opening conversation. That's, at least for me, it's been since I was a child. I was inspired by a mother who would stop us in the middle of an activity sometimes, or driving in the city, to point to something that was, fascinating or interesting or beautiful or whatever it might be. So there's that. And there's also the opportunity to find ways to have a communication with other people that come from a place of really deep listening. What is in their minds and what is in their hearts? Like, as difficult as that might be, I feel that if we don't cross through the depth of our division in our society, it will be really hard to try to have as many people as possible to join the effort. So in other words, it's kind of like really trying to sort of put aside our own belief system. And as Buddhism teaches us, right, it's like the not knowing mind, or the beginner's mind, and just really be with whatever the other person or the other group is saying, and trying to find a way to reach a place of understanding deeply. And from there, really trying to find, where is the common ground here? Because at the very bottom of everyone's existence is the source of everything. So it's kind of like we do share so much. So I don't mean to ramble on, but it's been something I've been really interested in, is to like, how can we learn to talk to the other side from a place of understanding and compassion, and, really deep listening.
David, you want to comment?
Well, I don't know that it should always come back to me, but you did say something that, just if I can follow up a little bit, because I think what you touched on is one of the most important things about the Bodhisattva path, which we often don't emphasize enough, and it's the idea of upaya kasalya, or skillful means. You talked about don't know mind and that kind of openness and deep listening. And what I heard you saying is, let's not go into a situation where we know what needs to be done, but sort of, opening up, and the whole idea of upaya, skillful means, is not having some sort of template of this is what needs to be done, but being really open to the situation, and flexible, and not, and out of that and out of the relationship that can enable, then things can actually happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sylvie.
No, thank you, David. If I may just add one thing that was also inspiring to me is that there was this woman who specialized, her name is escaping me, but she specialized in energy transition. And she was explaining how even like things like, we never thought that we would be able to economically give up fossil fuels. This is just as an example. And now everyone's on board to realizing that the cheapest form of energy nowadays is solar. So we're transitioning the civilization into solar panels, even from a place of like, it makes economics sense, right? So, anyway, it's just a little tiny example that I wanted to offer in that respect. But yeah, thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Sylvie. Doctress Newtopia.
Hi, I've been thinking a lot about fun. And I think fun is a problem in our society because fun is just going into your sensual desires. It's a desire thing. And I notice with myself, I desire for these things that are addictive or destructive, and they get in the way. And if you go to parties in the United States, everybody's there to have fun. They're not there to talk about climate change. And so I really think that we're in this denial thing because of fun. Then you get into the question of sacrifice. And I have a demon on one of my shoulders, and that demon says to me, hey, go and just use your money, go on a trip, go to Australia, spend $10,000 so you can see, those rocks down there. And, the demon is she's a bourgeois goddess. She's very privileged. And she really sometimes is very powerful, that demon. And and that's the demon of fun. She wants to have fun. And she doesn't really care about climate change, or, she's so privileged, it doesn't matter how much carbon she burns. And so anyway, so I've been thinking about, okay, so how am I going to stay put, not listen to the demon, be the model that David is talking about, get rid of that bourgeois goddess. And so anyway, I as an artist, I'm going to have this campaign, and it's campaign to run for president of the Galactic Federation. So I'm really gearing, like I got some lights and I got this good camera that you can see here. And it's going to give me a platform to be able to talk about a different form of governance, that a galactic governance and a different kind of civilization that is not based on fossil fuel. So I'm really excited about doing this. And so if I can just keep that demon away, that just says to hell with things and go and burn as much fossil fuel as money can buy, maybe I can make this campaign real. And I want to use Juliet's song about filling your potential as my my campaign song. I haven't talked to you about that yet, but I just love that song.
It's lovely to see your energy. You're always full of great ideas, and it's interesting that you're talking about fun. We could call this distraction, numbing. We don't want to look at the problems. So let me numb myself. Oh, I'm gonna watch football and I'm gonna drink beer and I'm gonna do a barbecue in the backyard And I'm going to go to Australia. And by the way, why not go to New Zealand? I saw those pictures. It's so beautiful. And as you said, and you know, your ideas are so, can I use the word far out?
Yeah, Galactic Federation is far out.
It's far out. So we're going to be with you on this journey. Keep us posted, please. Thank you. Dan, you raise your hand. Oh, David and then Dan. Oh, Bethany. David and then Bethany.
Well, just very briefly, first of all, I just want to say to Dr. Tress, you're going to get my vote. Just let me know when the election is, okay? Or let us all know when the election is. I'll do what I can there. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to reinforce Piero. You know, the real problem with consumerism at one, well, there's a number of issues, but one of them, I think it gets kind of boring. And, you know, then we need ever more, you know, you need more of the drug, right, to get the same effect as you had before. And somehow getting across or appreciating ourselves, and we're just realizing that, you know, as Shanti Deva said, you know, all the problems of our lives, all the problems in the world happen because we want to be happy, all the dukkha, and all of the joy happens when we see it as our task to help other people become happy. It's like somehow I am by no means against fun. I love fun, but the real fun is you know, something very different, I think, from the sort of wild cocaine fueled parties that some people define. I think Buddhism in a way is turning toward the real fun. And so the challenge is sort of, number one, embodying that, and also helping people just become more aware that consumerism is a drag after a while, boring, brings us down. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to come back to that, the real fun is liberation. You know, that's, if you've ever been to a protest and had that kind of energy, and if you're ever victorious, you know, that's calls for celebration. You know, but this fun thing, you just go to a cocktail party and you just randomly talk about nothing while you're drinking or smoking or eating pot. You know, it's just, it's like you said, it's just boring. And it lowers the energy vibration. And I'm tired of it.
Just let us know when the election is, Dr. S.
All right. Thank you.
Happy to provide your campaign song.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, sure. I want to go back to what David said, because I think it's really key that embodying and modeling the attitudes that we wish we could see be more widespread is what we can do. You know, everybody, there's all this, it always comes up, what can we do? Well, I think for most of us, what we can do is meditate on these changes and these truths and embody the values that we wish to see. And again, as you said, David, you can't, otherwise it's hypocritical. You know, if you're going to be telling people, or even just seeing people as, oh, those people who don't get it, or those people on the other side of the aisle, or all those Republicans. Well, that's pretty dualistic. That's not seeing us as all in this boat together. You know, we need to shift that view as we're together here. This is our planet, and these people may think this way differently, but it's not that I have to change them. I think that's kind of the wrong approach. It's more, I'm working on changing my mind and my attitude, and I want to exude the things, the transformations that I'm working on, and so I find in conversations that I have with people
At parties.
at parties, obviously, I always have heavy conversations with people at parties, but I mean, they're not heavy, they're engaging and interesting, because I like to know what other people think. And I want to, I always find things in common with people. And I just think that through our day-to-day interactions with people, if we're sincerely trying to think of us as all together as one, one entity, an organism that is this planet, that is all the people living here, that's how we present ourselves. That's how we operate in the world, rather than, those people. It's a subtle shift, but that's the shift that has to happen.
I agree. I want to say, if you guys can hear me, that there is a big storm here in Deerfield Beach right now, and I may lose my internet connection, but you guys have the ability to keep going. The recording most likely will stop, but if I lose connection, you guys continue. So,
Piero, I think you'll need to make someone a co-host who's unlikely to lose connection. Otherwise, it may cut off.
And Juliet, you'll have just volunteered to be the co-host. So please go ahead. Oren, you're next.
So first, thank you for putting this together. And I'd like to remind Piero that he'll never lose connection with all of us. Maybe electronically for a moment, but what this conversation stimulated in my mind. I heard a recent report. It might have been on NPR, I'm not sure, but it had to do with the small island nations and their sort of outsized influence in the United Nations. And so I was thinking that I have an expression, it wasn't mine, I heard this, but it was referred to by to the Americans, and it said, Americans always do the right thing after they've exhausted all other possibilities. And, small island nations probably don't have that luxury. Maybe we don't even in South Florida. So I'm thinking that that's a sort of ground zero place to support people that are going to be affected first. And there's probably different ways to support them, but I think that they are having an outsized influence to the size of the amount of people they are or the land mass that they represent. But they seem to have a voice. And perhaps that's a good place to start to support those people who already have that megaphone right now. And amplify it. So just a thought.
Thank you, Oren. Thank you, Donna. Yeah, I was reading about the raise of the sea level, and it was recent. It was about 3 weeks ago on March 20th, there was a new report from those scientists that create a panel on climate change of the United Nations. And they say pretty much, guys, we need to get out of fossil fuel in, I think, 17 years. By 2040, we need to cut all dependence on fossil fuel. And naturally, we know that drilling was allowed in Alaska. So, we see people warning us and the obsession with growth continuing. But to your point, Oren, there were the people from Marshall Islands And if I had to point Marshall Islands on the globe, I wouldn't know. I know it's in the middle of the Pacific, but I don't know where it is. I have seen beautiful pictures of the Maldives because, you know, the resorts and things like this. But all these islands, really, all the populations, they're going to be refugees pretty soon. And I understand what you're saying. You know, the consequences of the raise, one of the aspects of the ecological crisis, that is the raising of the sea level. You know, we live here in Florida. You know what we're talking about. So I don't want to monopolize. There is who else has who? I think that Barbara was about to leave, and I don't know if she left already. Let me see. Barbara, are you still with us? She left already.
And she left, yeah.
Okay, she is going to a 350 group meeting. And Justin also left. So let's see. What time is it? I don't know. I don't even know what time is it.
Just after 8 o'clock on the East Coast, I think. I think we
Okay.
have another little bit less than a half hour, as
Okay.
scheduled anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's use this time wisely. Who would like to go next? You have something in your heart. Otherwise, I'm going to start calling you.
Could I say
Yeah.
something while people are forming their questions? I
Sure.
just wanted to follow up a little bit on Oren, and apologies if I'm talking too much here, but you know, the other implication of what you were saying, the other reminder there is the tragedy, whatever you want to call it, that, you know, the people who are, I mean, we are all being affected by climate change and the larger ecological crisis, but I think it's just really, really important to remember that so far the people who are suffering the most are actually those who have contributed the least carbon to the atmosphere. So there's this huge issue of sort of climate justice there. And that applies to things like all these refugees. I mean, many of the refugees are not primarily political, but it ultimately comes back to, you know, devastation sometimes of their farmland and their ability to sustain themselves. One of the things I'm really pushing in the last year, and apologies if I can't remember how much I've said this before, but you know, we do talk occasionally the connection between Ecodharma and, you know, racism, the fact that people of color, even in the US, are usually living in areas that are more polluted. They get dumped on in that way. And that's a really important sort of intersectionality. But the other one I really want to emphasize is economic, you know, how the ecological crisis is also an economic crisis. And one of the main ways it plays out is this fascinating and horrifying fact that the top 1% of the wealthiest people in the world, which may well include many or most of us, because it's really not that. I mean, it's amazing when you look at how much you need to earn to be part of that 1%. It's not all that much. But the 1% have been responsible for approximately twice the carbon emissions of the bottom 50%. Think about that, the bottom 50% of the globe, right? What is it? Close to 4 billion people. And those of us, well, if we're not 1%, we're certainly 2 or 3%. We're way, way up there in terms of our lifestyle. So this whole element of interpersonal social justice as well is something that we always, I think, have to keep in mind. And that is, I think, one of the really strong impetuses to sort of affect our own personal lifestyle, right? We started out by talking a lot about modeling, and I think, you know, not only reducing our own personal carbon footprint, but also just our own consumerist lifestyle. That I think one of the things that the Bodhisattva path implies pretty clearly is, you know, minimizing that footprint, learning to live more simply, diet, for example. So sorry, I'm just repeating things I think all of us pretty well know, but I think we just need to keep those in the forefront of our mind. Yeah. So thank you, Oren.
Thank you, David. Does anybody would like to ask a question? Oren, you raise your hand again. Dan, you have your hand raised. So go ahead, Dan, and then Oren, and then I.
Okay. I just wanted to bring us back to a different topic. At the beginning of chapter 6, David, you talk about Sangha, and it's a fact that many Western Buddhists don't have one. I mean, some people live in a place where there's an affable group of people that they, get together and practice with, but a lot of us simply don't. Well, in the last few years, we've had this Zoom thing. We're doing it right now. And so it's been possible for there to be kind of a different kind of Sangha, one where we don't have to all live in the same place. But I've been thinking that there are advantages and disadvantages to this. I mean, the advantage is, we don't have to travel to be together. But the disadvantage is we all live in different places. So, a traditional Sangha might take on a local issue and do something about it. But, most of it, well, let's say, Regan had an issue in Connecticut. I'm not sure what the rest of us here could do about that. So I just wanted to bring that up as a modern development and a problem to think of.
I think we lost. No, Oren, do you want to
Yeah.
go?
Can you hear me? So I just wanted to kind of dovetail on what David was saying. When there's large gatherings around the world to talk about climate change, Western countries come off as very preachy, and often the less developed countries that didn't contribute as much to the carbon issue will say, well, you already had your industrial revolution. Big of you to want us to not have one. And I don't know what kind of answer there is to that, because they're basically trying to come into a world that is more comfortable to live in. We have a lot of conveniences, running water, clean water, things that became available as a result of industrial revolution, scientific revolution, technological revolution. And so I'm sure we appear kind of preachy to them when they're just trying to raise their standard of living to where they don't have dysentery.
Yeah, that's a great point right there. And yeah, it's complex, really. The fact is that we are 8 billion people in the world. So if everybody were to live at the standard of living that we have here in America, the average American, there are not enough resources on this globe to bring all this population to that standard of living. So that's an interesting aspect, meaning with the current science and with the current technology, and I'm not saying that we are not evolving in science and technology, but with the current ways that we have organized ourselves to live on this planet, pretty much we will, some people say we need 3 planet Earths or 5 planet Earths to get these 8 billion people to live as the average American or the average European lives. And they want that. I mean, it's such an imbalance, such inequality. So I recently said, we don't want to save life on this planet. What we, the privileged ones, what we want to do is to save our way of life, our comfortable way of life. We just want, science and technology to come, make some minor adjustments here and there, but as long as I have my material belongings, and as long as I have my AC or my car or my, all the comforts that I have, that's going to be okay. And so I don't think we are really connected with we don't have compassion. Let's put it this way. We're not really connected with the pain of others. So let's close our borders, live here as much comfortably as we can, and the rest is the rest. And we don't see that we're all in this together, actually. So that's my speech for the night. Ivan.
Yeah, there's a few things that David said that really struck a core in me. The one is that, of course, that eventually, our civilization will collapse, and of course, we're all afraid that it's going to happen soon. And I think that to really come to terms with that is pretty difficult. I'd like also where my mind's going right now is looking at the three poisons, and I was just thinking that a lot of people talked about we need to listen to each other, and that's so true. And I think that when we do deep listening, we're really going against ignorance, because we don't know what the other person thinks or feels. And I think with my own ignorance, to build on one comment, is that my own ignorance wants to say, well, it's not too bad. I can take the plane to go see this teacher at the other end of the planet, because I didn't do that much. I didn't spend much of my carbon footprint this year. But in fact, as David was saying, we need to look at our own footprint on the planet, and we need to look at, as a system, how does our society work? What about the inputs and the outputs? I was struck by a comment, a podcast from this French scientist that I listened to a few weeks ago, and he calculated the units of energy that average European or North American or Westerner spends. And it's as if each one of us has between the equivalent of 400 to 600 slaves working for us. With our cars, our vacuum cleaners, he calculated the amount of energy that we spend on a year. It's as if we have that amount of people working for us. And that's what fossil fuels has brought to us. So much potent, concentrated energy. Are we ready to go down to 200? Are ready to go down a little bit so that other people can. So sometimes I feel that because I'm conscious and because I feel connected to the earth and I like hiking, I feel that I'm not that ignorant. I can teach a lesson to other people, and why don't you connect to the earth? But I am realizing on this path that I know so little about the planet, about other people, and about myself. I have to, be in check all the time. Anyway, that was my few thoughts on the three poisons there, especially ignorance.
Sorry, I was muted. I was calling Janet, but I said, go ahead, Janet.
Hi. So I'm so delighted to be here. And David, I really appreciate that whole series of questions at the end. Bethany, you're laughing. Anyway, I'm going to say something silly, but so I am going to say something silly. And I would love more than anything I rack my brain. I live in a very small community up in the far reaches of Vermont. And, I'm under the impression these days that help is not really wanted by those who are not impacted by issues. Like there's this kind of movement. I get a sense that there's a movement where people really want to address the issues on their own. And I understand, I have a respect for that. And so, I can knock on the door of this community group and say, what can I do to help? I can take notes because I don't really know what's going on in other people's minds. And it brings me back to the point of really not understanding a thing about interdependence. Like I get it, like, there's this economy that like we're interdependent and there are all these like structural systemic things where we're interdependent. But on that whole issue of having gratitude and being able to stand sort of in our suffering, I don't get where the intersections are in a deeper low level where like, what is the model for that? What is the model for engaging people who are at the heart of the crisis? Otherwise, I'm just a bystander taking notes. So I don't know. I just thought I would just drop that there. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. David?
Yeah, just one short response. And, your question is very big. So let me just say something about the beginning. This issue of our not knowing, or the ignorance, and the fact, I mean, what you said at the beginning really struck me. There's a lot of people, especially if they have a nice middle class lifestyle, they don't want to be helped. They don't, Buddhism. Ivan talked about the three poisons, right? Usually translated what greed, aversion, and delusion. Buddhism, in particular, the big issue for Buddhism is not, say, sin or evil. The fundamental problem is ignorance. And in terms of the three poisons, usually we say delusion. And I think one of the challenges that we need to remember is that these three poisons have been institutionalized, right? I really think that if greed means you always want more, I think that's a pretty good description of our economic system in terms of how it functions and how it mainly seems to help millionaires become billionaires. It encourages that preoccupation with money and flashing it around. We can talk about the militarism, of as kind of institutionalized aversion. But I think where Buddhism really intersects, I think we have to understand the role of the media. Now we can add the internet to that, but just remembering how something like Fox News and the way people's understanding of the world and themselves is so largely unconsciously influenced by pretty potent forces, and how even with political campaigns, you have enormous amounts of money going into sophisticated analysis and sort of, group psychological manipulation. So what I'm doing here is not giving an answer to you, Janet, or to anyone. It's just highlighting that one of the major problems that we have to address is institutionalized delusion, institutionalized ignorance. And if anything, one would hope that Buddhism would be well positioned to address that. And yet traditionally, Buddhism addresses it on the individual level, right? We meditate, we let go of our own delusions and so forth. But how you address that collectively once it's been institutionalized, that is, for me, a big part of the problem, because it seems clear the ecological crisis, if we just focus on that, it's not just a crisis of economics. Fundamentally, it's a crisis of consciousness. It's a crisis of worldview, how we understand ourselves in relation to the natural world. And what do you do if people don't want to change themselves? What do you do if people aren't aware that they're living a story that's actually very problematical and that we need better stories, but they don't know it's a story? Usually we're identifying with the story. We think it's reality and aren't aware that there's alternatives. sorry here, I guess I'm just sort of throwing things out, just sort of, for me, this really is an essential part of the challenge. And needless to say, it's not as though I have any simple answer to it, because Buddhism traditionally addresses it on the individual level. And now when you get to larger social structures that perpetuate profound ignorance, that's a whole new dimension of the problem that we have to find ways to address. Yeah. Sorry, I carried on a bit there.
Well, that was great. And thank you for your question, Janet. Doctoress Newtopia, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to just say that I think that we need a new level on religion. And that is really looking at the utopian program. You know, how do we live together in a way that's planetary, that deals with a new economic system? And, you know, utopian thought is at least 2,000 years old. It should be taught in schools. It's not. You know, we have a lot of examples of intentional communities throughout the world and throughout history. And there are several utopian studies societies, which you can get a lot of information about this. But, you know, even if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that's a utopian inspiration. So I think that if we can get to the public that we're in a utopian time, that this is a time of great creativity on how to create a new socioeconomic system, then we might have a chance at really a wonderful creative renaissance. The American lifestyle is definitely the problem. And moving beyond fossil fuels is our one of our solutions. So I think that if we can move to a planetary level, and a lot of people I talk to when I say, yeah, I'm running for president of the Galactic Federation, they get excited because I think the nation state system is basically corrupt. And people can feel it. They don't want to vote for anybody. They do, you know, but it's not the right system. And so we really need to have a different form of elections and a different reason for voting. And we could do this as well because we have the technology to create some kind of electronic voting system that could be global.
Very good. Excellent. Yeah, this it's so interesting because when you talk about you know, a global the planet, the conscience that we are all in this together, that we are just the globes, you know, rotating and traveling through the cosmos. So that idea of the planet, and when we talk about these ideas, there's so much reaction. I mean, so many people they want to keep the borders, they want to keep the separate countries, they want to expand their territory. So why not invade Ukraine and enlarge a little bit my territory? So for me, and I think that for us on this panel here, these are such obsolete ideas. Ideas that do not make sense, right? But you see those leaders of the world with these immature teenage gang leader mentalities saying, oh, I need to expand and I need to go on that neighborhood. I need to be the ruler of that neighborhood as well. So there's a lot on the maturity, our expansion of friendliness, of compassion, of joy with others, of equanimity, of generosity, gratitude, service to others. This is what we have been developing by our practice of introspective, contemplative practices of, for instance, mindfulness. insight meditation that we practice. So it would be wonderful if we had more mature, I'm saying mature, but perhaps more enlightened leaders. And they should go through a test to see if they can become candidates for any public. I was in Barrie with David, and I said, everybody running for public office has to spend 1 year in the International Space Station and spend 1 month with David Loy. You don't remember that, David, but I said that.
No, but I hope it includes everyone applying in the Galactic Federation as well, candidates for that.
That's wonderful. Reagan.
You'll have to
Yeah,
unmute yourself.
There we
Regan.
go. Yeah, I lost my cursor. It was, I think just in the last two conversations, most of what I was going to try to add, I think feel like it was covered, but yeah, thank you so much everyone for being here. It's been so wonderful to hear your insights, and David for joining, and Piero for organizing all of that, just fantastic that we can gather. And so I wanted to speak to, what was coming up for me, David, when you mentioned the crisis of consciousness of worldview. And I'm someone who is, guided by the question lately of what is our way forward. And it's an enormous question, right? With many different answers. And how do we frame things? How do we frame it? So what came up for me was, the people not wanting to change their story, and which of course creates, for many people, any kind of change creates anxiety, let alone climate change, right? Or, the impending climate change, whatever it may be. So a sense of lack of control, sense of, losing this false sense of permanence that we try so hard maybe to hold on to. And then, how Buddhist teachings can be helpful with that through impermanence, which then ties back to our own mortality and facing our own death, which I feel is, in this culture, we don't look at that. We don't sit with that. And I can say that since having sat with it myself, it changed everything for me. Being diagnosed with cancer the way I was, it changed absolutely everything for me. And it's why I do this work now. But there is, how do I describe this? A very deep sense of calm, a very deep grounding, that a lot can change around me, but it's a whole new perspective. So I feel like there's a great teaching just with that alone, sitting with our mortality. And I know there are Buddhist teachings around that as well. And the fact that we are always evolving and co-evolving and co-arising. And Piero, to what you were saying, how do we come together for this new story? So many voices are coming at this in so many different ways, through the language of love or compassion, or I was saying the other night, Charles Eisenstein's From the Story of Separation to the Story of Interbeing, and so many stories being framed, the new story or the great work, and the Joanna Macy's work, The Great Turning. And, Rebecca Solnit is coming out with an edited book. Actually, it just came out, not too late, Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility. And another author, Susan Bauer Wu, is coming out with a book in June, A Future We Can Love, How We Can Reverse the Climate Crisis with the Power of Our Hearts and Minds. So there are a lot of people who are on it. It's just, how do we get it to be even more so collective? And I think ultimately, it's a matter of modeling. It's a matter of getting together in groups, and it's a matter of modeling. And I will say this kind of a funny little thing to add in. If I don't know if anybody's heard me say this before, but about a year or two ago, I said to my son, I have 2 in college and one that's he's about 10 now. He's probably about 9 at that time. I was tucking him into bed and I was trying to explain to him the work I was doing, you know, reconnecting humans to nature in the best elementary school language that I could. And he thought on it. He said, Mom, I think it's really great what you're doing, but I think it's going to take like 9 generations. So I don't know how a young child could have any concept of time like that, but you know, he sees that it's not an overnight process, and nor did we get here overnight. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Reagan. David, it is already 8:30, and I think that I'm going to leave the floor open. If there's some of you did not say anything,
Good.
it's I, as the officiator of this wedding, as I usually say, speak now or remain silent forevermore. So we have Nancy, Stevie, Marcella, Kate, and Tom and Kate. So who, any of you would like to say something or ask a question? Kate from Denver, Nancy from Delray Beach.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. I'm so grateful for being here, and thank you, David and Piero and Juliet and all of you. I have no questions other than, has anybody figured out a major bank yet that is not directing our money through fossil fuel growth? Secondly, it kind of comes back to what Reagan said, and I think Bethany said it initially about modeling, and it just sort of comes back, you know, there are all of these wonderful ideas and questions that we all have, but to continue to work on our bodhisattva path and with our private meditation, you know, Buddhist practice, what have you, that hopefully, you know, if it takes 9 generations, so be it, but that we're doing something that might generate some interest and, you know, somebody questioning us about why are we so happy or whatever. But thank you all.
Thank you, Nancy. Anne.
I did unmute. I too want to express my deep gratitude for being here. I've gone through so many different reactions in this last hour and a half of being so encouraged to think positively. And then at the moment, I am in the midst of all this real estate stuff. And if that isn't greed institutionalized, I don't know what is. And it's sort of, my mind is kind of spinning with all of that. I do want to decrease my own carbon footprint, but today I was adding up how much it's just going to cost in terms of money, not to mention resources, to move from here to there. But that's what I'm doing. So I don't know. So I like all the positive feelings and expressions and ideas. The idea of feeling gratitude, modeling gratitude, the idea that maybe not all of 9 generations, maybe we can do it sooner than 9 generations. So I'm feeling at once exhausted and also really energized. And I just want to thank you all for that.
Thank you, Anne. So someone else, don't be shy.
I need to go soon to go cook dinner. So it's getting quite late, but thank you. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Juliet.
Definitely living into this whole situation.
Can I also just remind people, check out the Ecodharma website, and you know, maybe if you're able, consider attending one of those. Well, the 11-day, we've extended the 11-day Ecodharma retreat. I think it's mostly early August this summer, if that's a possibility. The other thing, excuse me for the pushing it, the end of this month, there's the Unitarian Universalists are having a Ecodharma colloquium convocation that I'm going to be leading. This is near Chicago, just north of the Wisconsin border. If anyone's interested in that kind of thing, that's also coming up, and that's going to be like four pretty intensive days and quite interesting if anyone's in the area. So if you might be interested, contact me. Sorry for the publicity.
Wonderful. Someone else?
I'll just jump in to say, Piero, thank you so much for the invite, and it's wonderful to meet all of you here tonight. I met Piero last summer and David as well at the Rocky Mountain Ecodharma Center during one of these amazing retreats. So that's not a shameless plug. That is just legitimately, it is an incredible experience. So certainly recommended. I am curious, David, just, I know that we're running short on time. If there's anything that's come up for you since the book was published that speaks to, you know, the last, or that the chapter we've been discussing, or otherwise that maybe a bit of time provided some new perspective or anything else. Is there anything that you would have added or perhaps even subtracted, I guess is my question.
Thank you for that. Very good question. And a brief answer is, despite what the book said, because there was the book, I would occasionally get questions. People say, I want to be an ecosattva, but I don't know what to do. So the main thing, the main development afterwards, I think, has been that three-part meditation that I started with talking about. That I think, you know, people are asking me, what should I do? I can't, you know, everyone's situation is different. You look at the Buddhist tradition, you look at the sutras, and no, that they don't tell us what to do. But we do have this wonderful practice, right? We have these mindfulness, meditation practices. And I think if we employ them in the right way and sort of open up to our deeper essential nature, that can really help us. So for me, just that has been the main thing. I mean, obviously, if I were going to rewrite the book, I would change the beginning just because things have developed, and in many ways, ecologically, much worse than they were sort of 4 or 5 years ago. But we all know that. Yeah. Thank you for the question, Kate.
Thank you.
Kate, are you teaching Buddhist economics?
I slipped it into so I'm teaching executive MBA students, and so that, you know, the future business leaders of America, or kind of current business leaders of America. And we had a kind of back-to-back courses that covered really the climate crisis, and had a case that engaged what should this company do in order to meet kind of a zero carbon footprint plan, and talked about all of the incentives that go into that, and the, you know, the reality that businesses are facing in order to get there, but a really dynamic conversation among you know, business leaders, which was really great. And before we did that, I did put this comparison of kind of our current economic system, neoclassical economic theory, summarizing the assumptions of neoclassical economic theory next to the assumptions of Buddhist economic theory. And the dialogue among the students was really quite robust. And a lot of them just couldn't imagine a world where we had Buddhist economics or anything of anything like that. So needless to say, it was a great conversation, and I look forward to having it again next year with a new set of folks.
Dan, you should comment, because I put both of you in touch. You should say a few words, Dan.
No, I don't really have anything to say about that now. It's just that Claire Brown's book, Buddhist Economics, is slim volume. That's just, it's probably perfect for all of us in terms of the level that it's getting at. And it made a nice contrast between the assumptions of neoclassical economics and the assumptions that you would expect Buddhists to make about what's important and what's less important.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Okay. David, would you like to say something else? Otherwise, I'm going to bring things to
You know
a
what I
close.
have to say? what I have to say is I have to go now because I have another Zoom in 1 minute.
Okay, so
I'm really sorry about it because I'm loving this discussion. Let's do it again sometime.
okay, so let's do what we usually do. Let's close our eyes and think about one word that encapsulates the feelings that we have. I know we all feel gratitude, but whatever feelings you have of the conversation that we had, this beautiful conversation that we had. So I'm gonna look at the squares and call your name. So unmute yourself and one word. Let's start with Stevie and then Linda.
Enlightened.
Enlightened. Linda and then Nancy.
Opening.
Opening. Nancy and then Marcella.
Continue making space.
Continue making space. Marcella and then David.
Yeah, follow up what you said, Nancy. Continue to hold space for the evolution of our own consciousness.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Continue to hold space for the evolution of our own consciousness. David and then Bethany.
Well, energized by all of you, and also goodbye because I'm late for the other Zoom. So
bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Hope to meet you all again.
Sure. Bethany and then Dan.
Happy.
Beautiful.
Sharing.
Sharing. Kate and then Reagan.
I'd say inspired.
Inspired. Reagan and then Anne.
Grateful. We're very
Grateful.
grateful.
Anne and then Ivan.
Inspired.
Yeah. Ivan and then Oren.
Peaceful.
Oren and then Donna.
Contemplative.
Contemplative. Donna and then Kate.
Change.
Kate, if you would you like to unmute yourself and say something? Okay. So well, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was lovely. I feel inspired as well. A lot of ideas in my head, and yeah, good things are going to come from this meeting. I want to say that I saw faces today that I haven't seen in a while, and this brought me a lot of joy. So some of you are in the Sangha daily, and some of you I see every now and then. Well, I wish you all lots of success in all your initiatives, okay? Much love to you all.
Thanks, Piero.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everybody. Be safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Piero. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.